So another topic that we wanted to jump into today, this is probably the most interesting story I've seen pop up in a while.
And weren't we talking about Albany and bad policies?
Yeah. We've been talking about income. Like, I think income, outside income, has come up on every topic we've talked about so far. A Press Connect report showed that State Senator Tom O'Mara has been collecting as much as $150,000 annually from his private law firm because it has contracts with a half dozen municipalities. State records show that some of those communities are in his district. O'Mara says he sees no issue with it. Part of his quote with the Press Connect said, "I do some legal work for some of those clients from time to time, but most of them are long-standing clients of the firm since the 80s. Frankly, before I was given the law firm, and when we merged into a larger law firm, they were clients that I continued to originate credit for and continue to do legal work for." That's so, it's interesting, right?
I just love when people are confronted with, hey, this is a conflict of interest, and they're like, actually, I don't see a problem at all. As if that means then there's no problem. As long as the person involved thinks it's okay, I guess it's all right. I mean, since when did that become the standard by which we evaluate whether or not things are right or wrong?
Well, and the other part of it, too, is, he's essentially saying, beyond saying, I don't think it's an issue, so it's not an issue. He's saying, most of these clients have been clients of the firm since the 80s.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's usually the second answer, right? You confront somebody who's done the wrong thing. First they say, well, I don't think it's wrong. And then they say, but I've been doing it for a long time anyway, so what's the big deal? And again, totally missing the point that doesn't matter if you got away with it for a long time. Doesn't matter if you think it's fine. You as an elected official have a responsibility to mitigate any conflicts, real or perceived. So if you're presented with a question that someone perceives there's a conflict of interest, it's one thing to say, let me explain to you why it's not a real conflict of interest, although I am not sure in this case that there's a good argument to be made that it's not. But then, you respond by saying, okay, my obligation as an elected official is to be accountable. Here's why it's not a real conflict of interest. And then here is why I think even the perception of a conflict, it wouldn't be correct. You can't just say, no, it's not. I don't think so. How is that? I understand that I'm not yet addressing the substance of the point, but for me, it is a larger issue. If an elected official is asked a question and they don't give a robust answer, they just say, well, it's always been like this and it's fine with me. I think that does say something about the way that they perceive the office, that they answer to no one. And that's a problem.
Yeah, I think, and Senator O'Mara serves in the southern tier. I think the real question, I'm not super familiar with the dense population centers in the southern tier, or how they're ranked or anything like that. I'm just looking at it from what typically happens here in the Finger Lakes and the Central Finger Lakes. So like a Seneca County frequently works with law firms out of Rochester, not because, or Rochester or even Buffalo for that matter, not because maybe they're the best, but just because they're the nearest who handles the type of work that they're looking to get done. And I don't know anything about Senator O'Mara's actual firm, law firm, what they specify in or otherwise. That said, I think there does seem to be this issue where there tend to not be enough options, I guess, would be the best way of putting it. Because here's what I come back to.
Let's not say that there aren't enough lawyers to go around, because I'm not sure that is a failing industry.
Well, so my point is like, why should that opportunity to have that conflict even exist?
Right. No, that's an excellent question.
So why is the municipality partnering with their state representative in Senate?
And this has been one of the questions all along. And again, look, it's no secret. In our own district, Senator Zolio and his work with Harris Beach, one of his roles that he continued to collect income for was recruiting clients. Many of those clients were firms or municipalities who had business in or within the district. Now, that was raised as a potential conflict of interest, and people just kind of brushed it off, right, because they liked him. The point, though, is that if you start normalizing that behavior and nobody deals with the broader issue of how this ends up having a corrupting influence on state government in terms of policy and legislation, then we're missing the boat. So you look at Tom Amara, and you look at some of the stuff that's been going on in the southern tier for these municipalities and their landfills, and potentially accepting hydrofracking waste, even though hydrofracking's banned in New York State. His firm has been involved in many cases that I would say muddy the water, no pun intended, but do have some crossover between the types of issues he's thinking about and debating on the state level and the actual transactional business that's happening within his own district. And I think the Waterfront blog, Peter's Waterfront blog, talked about that at some point. This is kind of an ongoing issue, and it is this question of outside income generally for state legislators. And again, if Cuomo or Molinaro, right, the two main party candidates. I mean, I think Stephanie Miner, I heard her interview, and I should disclose, I have no affiliation with her campaign. I've never met her. I don't know her. But I've listened to her stuff. I've read her stuff. She gets it. I don't think she's going to get elected, but she gets it. I think that the two mainline candidates, whoever they are after the primary, ought to take notice and actually propose doing something about this, because I don't care if they've been doing it since the 80s. That wouldn't fly in my house if my kids said, oh, yes, well, I've been stealing candy since I was 10. Well, that just makes me upset that I didn't know about it earlier. That doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
So that's, and I just say my kids don't steal candy, but I'm just...
Your kids take a lot on the show.
They really do, and they watch it, and then they're like, Mom, why do you make us sound like that? No, they're very good kids. But, my point is that people need to start holding what happens outside their household to the same standard they would hold within their own household. And the argument that, well, what's the big deal? I've always done it this way, would not fly in your house. Or it shouldn't, I hope. I hope that people aren't. I
think it's one of those things that most people just don't look very closely at. Yeah. And it isn't one of those things that's held under the microscope all the time. Like this story in a lot of ways is an outlier and is interesting because it's an outlier. Right. We don't see these stories every day, even though I'm sure this type of scenario or these types of, outside income stories could be made possible every single day.
Oh, yeah. But this did come up. This did come up when Senator Helming was getting those Lulu payments, the right. payments for the chairmanship she didn't actually have, and O'Mara was one of the ones involved in that. The New York Times article that did the reporting that kind of broke that story and resulted in some of them returning the money and others keeping it, that did talk about the fact that an additional issue was that he continued to do legal work with his firm that had clients. But because the main story was the money being taken for these right. chairmanships, that kind of fell by the wayside. But it is a red flag. It's certainly a red flag.
I think really what basically this comes back to is what we're both saying. There need to be better guidelines in place. There need to be better rules that govern how the folks in government operate.
Right.
So that, you don't have these scenarios where people can even tempt fate with,
right.
Crossing a line or even getting close to a gray area that might be perceived as something even if it isn't.
Yeah, and enforcement of the rules. A rule
right.
is only as good as people are willing to follow through.